thank you everyone for coming today. We're doing the big Black in Genetics Skype a Scientist kind of collaboration today. And we're basically going to be, the title of today's event is Making Sense of Our Genes, a Big Conversation. And we have Dr. Loydie and Aarin. So thank you all for coming so much.
Thank you for having us.
And as always, we have Aarin, our translator, down below. Thanks, Aarin, again, for always being here with us.
Thank you, Aarin.
So we're going to start off quick before we get the questions going. If Dr. Loydie and Aarin, if you wouldn't mind just doing a quick intro about what you do and a little bit about yourself. And we could start with Loydie above, because you're just the top one right now for me.
Okay, sure. So my name is Loydie Jerome-Majewska. I'm an associate professor here at McGill. I've been at McGill for 15 years. Before that, I was in the States, so I did my Bachelor's of Arts at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and then did my Ph.D. at Columbia University Presbyterian Hospital. And then from there, I moved to Sloan Kettering, and from Sloan Kettering to McGill. So at McGill, what I do is I supervise students, research associates and postdocs, and the goal of our projects is to understand and identify genes that are important for normal developmental processes, and then to make mutations in those genes using genetic manipulation of cells in the past, stem cells, and now zygotes directly. And then looking during the embryogenesis to know when we first see an effect and what that effect is, and if we can identify things we can change to reverse that effect. So that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. And go ahead, Aarin.
I'm Aarin A Williams. I'm a clinical genetic counselor at Kaiser Permanente. I studied my undergraduate degree in biology at the illustrious Howard University, and I received my master's degree in human genetics and genetic counseling at Stanford. It was about 10 years ago that I was entering into my genetic counseling program. So here in the clinical setting, I'll speak with patients and families who are at risk of inheriting genetic diseases. We talk to people who are pregnant, people who have a personal or family history of cancer, and then we'll meet with families who might have children with developmental differences or things that have an etiology that could be genetic, to try to give families more information about what that could mean as their family grows.
Very cool. And Aarin, we already have a question for you. So someone asks, what are you doing to ensure that underrepresented members of our community are aware of the benefits of genetic counseling?
It's a great question. So I think for starters, the field of genetic counseling in general is just really underutilized. But if I'm thinking about specifically what I do to increase awareness in my community, I think the first step is really to change the narrative and work to combat some of the misconceptions that people have about what it is that genetic counselors do. Oftentimes when people come into the clinical setting here, they might already have an idea about genetic counselors and the decisions that we're discussing with patients that aren't necessarily accurate. People might think that we'll push them into doing tests or procedures or surgical interventions that they're just not ready for. And that's just in general. But I think it's important to address the elephant in the room among the Black community, which is really just the mistrust of medicine and genetics in general. The best way that I can think to really do something to address that in the community is to be that face, because representation matters. So here at Kaiser where I work, there are opportunities to really diversify and bring awareness to our field in general. I think that my supervisors and the directors of our organization here really do a good job about diversity and equity and inclusion, but it's important for me to kind of step into that space and decide to be the face that people are going to see, to say, I can identify with that person and maybe they have something that's for me. So in my personal experience, some of the things that I've done have been a little bit out of my comfort zone, but my director of our service area has been really pushing, social media and trying to get people involved. And even though public speaking is not my favorite thing, I decided to be the face of one of the videos that discuss cancer genetics and family history and the value of getting that information about your family members and what that could mean for you and your family as a whole. Because a lot of times the people that we're talking to and the information that we're giving them is so much bigger than the person in front of us, right? And then if those opportunities aren't there, it's important to create that space. So I wanted to focus on sickle cell disease. And I'm here in Los Angeles, and when I was in my training program, I wanted to figure out how to do something in my community that was gonna make an impact. And I Googled Los Angeles sickle cell disease, and I found the Sickle Cell Disease Foundation of California, really tried to get involved and just immerse myself in what I can do to really make a difference for the community that I grew up in that means so much to me. So I would say the biggest things to do are to change the narrative and to be the face of representation in your community if you're trying to impact people that look like you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then to Dr. Loydie, we have a question about, maybe I can combine these two. So someone's asking kind of like, what is your daily life like? And they also want to know, someone else wants to know, in your research with genes, do you also identify genes that are abnormal that may lead to differences?
Okay. So I'll start with the second question first. So the way that we identify the genes that are actually important is to find when things go wrong. And so my favorite collaborations are actually with genetic counselors because they get to see the patients. And then if it's familial, then in the past what we had done was we would get sample from those patients and we would use sequencing technology to identify the mutations, and then would relay that back to the patients. And if they agree, then they enter a study. And so we report what we find after we make the models as part of a study. So that's the model we've used in the past. So since 2010, our lab used exome sequencing for a lot of this type of analysis. But more recently, what we've decided to do is to actually focus on a group of genes where these genes are expressed in every cell. So that means that every cell in your body needs these genes to do their normal function. But when they have a problem in the baby's face are not formed properly. And so the questions we're asking is, why would something that you need in every cell give you something so specific in the newborn? And so what I do from day to day is, I write a lot of grants. So my normal day looks like searching the literature to find out where I can apply for grants. So applying for grants, meeting with my students. So I do a lot of meeting with, I have graduate students, masters, PhD. And so we would meet and discuss their projects, look at data. There's a fair number of meetings because I do a fair number of association type things. So usually I have 2 or 3 Zoom meetings these days, but before that it was in person. I would go to these meetings where we discuss how we can impact society, because for me that's a really important thing that I'm focusing on now, because I've been in this field for over 20 years. It's really exciting to see more faces like mine, but for the longest time mine was the face at all of the meetings, and I don't want that reality to continue for the next group of people coming up. So these days I spend a fair amount of time trying to change that, either at my university or with my association. And then I come home, if I'm in the office, make dinner, the usual stuff you do, and then read a few papers. So that's my day in a nutshell.
Nice, that's awesome. So then I guess this next question could potentially apply to both of y'all. So they asked specifically for people of color interested in the field of genetic counseling, what kind of advice you have, but also I think you could apply this to what you do as well, Loydie.
Okay.
So I would say that for people who are interested in the field of genetic counseling, they need to be mindful of the fact that there may not be other people who look like them in their field of study. In my training program, I was the only person of color, really, period, not just Black, but no other person, Black, Indigenous, person of color at all. And I think that you have to kind of sit with that, but not shy away from the discomfort that might bring to you. when I was applying to graduate school, because I was coming from a historically Black college, I really was driven by the mindset of trying to make a difference in minority populations. That was my motivation from the very beginning. And I made sure that in all of my applications to graduate school that I stressed that that was what was most important to me. And I think that if I had to pick a couple of things for people to be mindful of, or if they're interested in the field, don't shy away from what makes you you. Don't worry about making people uncomfortable while being your genuine self. And the other thing is that there are far fewer spaces in genetic counseling programs than there are capable young people who are looking to enter into the field. So if you find yourself applying and not getting accepted your first time around, don't let that dissuade you or make you think that you are not the perfect candidate to do this very important work. So I think those are the two things.
So I think all of those things would apply. I have to say, when I was applying to graduate school, I actually did not know about genetic counselors. I had never encountered one. And so it's only after I started my research projects that I realized how important genetic counselors are. And I think it's really important that we have Black genetic counselors. So this has been the most exciting thing about Black genetics for me, is that meeting all of these Black folks. So for me, my field was pretty much to get here, your typical route. So I'm from an immigrant family. I was good in science. And so I was pre-med. And then as part of pre-med, we had to do work in the hospital. And it turns out I hate the hospital. Like, I don't like sick people. But I really love being in the lab. Like, I really enjoy that. So I got involved in being in a lab as an undergraduate student. I was very, very lucky. I had some amazing female mentors who I would say like took my interest and didn't kill it. Like they allowed me to look at papers as an undergraduate student to find what I was interested in. And I love the idea that you go from a single cell to this complex organism. So I've been studying this since, I can remember at this point. And then to apply to graduate school, I was lucky, like I said, right? So I was in the lab, so I knew that they paid for you to go to graduate school. And for me, that was huge, right? Because I don't have to take loans. And the amount of money, although it's small, it was huge to me. I was like, I could tell my parents that I'm getting paid to go to school. And so that's what I did. And so I think I was very naive too. I mean, there were 2 of us at Columbia in the whole building. So we were our crowd. My friend was getting an MD PhD and I was getting a PhD. We were both from the Caribbean. One was Jamaican, one was Haitian. Nobody could tell the difference, but that was fine. One was really short, one was tall, but like, it was cool because we had our own world and we were there to do our thing. And then I look at my path and I say, I've been very lucky. I've heard stories where people have not been as lucky or nurtured, I guess is the right word. So I would say find someone who will nurture your enthusiasm, who will nurture your dream, whatever color those person might be, because there aren't enough of us right now in the field. There are more folks coming, but there aren't. So I think those are the important ingredients. Find your passion. Don't let anybody knock you off your passion. If somebody's not supporting you, find the right person to support you and pursue what makes you happy on a daily basis. That's what I would say.
And that's so important. When I was applying to graduate school, trying to push my whole agenda about what was most important to me, I think the biggest payoff when thinking about cost was the fact that I was awarded a scholarship to increase diversity awareness, right? Yeah. And so I think that I was a little concerned at first about how my approach might come across, but it was what was important to me. And in the end, I think that it was worth that risk of saying, I'm here because I want to represent everybody Black, right? And saying that and owning it and getting that really, really, really important benefit of having the cost not be an additional layer of concern when going into grad school is really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super inspiring, actually. And so we have a question that kind of ties to this we can maybe go both of y'all again. So like, how has being Black and being a woman impacted your experience in the field? It sounds like it's maybe been, you've had positive experiences, but the person asking the question is also interested in, have you dealt with any discrimination, and if you would be open to talking about that.
You go first, Dr. Loydie.
Sure. So the intersectionality is a real place. It exists.
Absolutely.
So, you know, like I said, I was very focused, right? So nobody was going to come and push me off of this path that I wanted to be on. Having said that, it's not like people didn't try. And even to this day, you know, this is why for me it's important that the path that I took does not have all of these distractions, right? Because what I want to do is science. But the everyday reality is that it's not often possible to go to work and just do science, because on the way to your office, you encounter society, right? It's around you. And so even if you're surrounded by colleagues that support and nurture you, you will get people who come in your face and tell you you don't belong because of how you look. You know, you will get your work criticized, you will get dismissed, your ideas will be, you will be, I think for me, what I get most angered about is when my ideas are infantilized almost. It's like you don't know what you're talking about, but it's like I've trained for this and I am the expert here. And it took a long time to find my voice and to, I guess, speak back, right? So I would just get really angry because you don't want to be that angry person either, right? So I would just get angry and then I'd go home and like, and so now, you know, I've learned how to say, well, no, I am the expert. And that is hard to do as a Black woman. It's really, really hard. And having allies help, but it's not always the case that your allies will speak up at the time. They will talk to you afterwards and say, oh, you know, yeah, I think this is happening. But it's like, well, where were you when I was sitting in that room kind of sweating bullets? So yes, I'm not going to lie. Until it's normalized to have Black people in these fields, yeah, the intersectionality is a place, but you have to compartmentalize a lot. That's how I deal with it.
I definitely agree that intersectionality is a real thing. And when you're trying to navigate so much of this world as a Black woman, as a clinician, as a scientist in this field where there are so few, and you don't have people who look like you as your cheerleaders, it's very easy to let someone's criticism of you knock you off your feet. And I'm sure that Dr. Loydie can also agree that there have been plenty of people, especially in the clinical setting, if I'm giving information, that look at me like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'll find them kind of spying the walls, looking at my degrees to see where I might have learned such a thing. And it's at first, when I first started as a genetic counselor, I would think to myself, is this because I'm Black? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm young? Is it because my voice is high and I have a bubbly personality? You know, there are so many different reasons why someone might question you. But when you're living this experience, all of that is part of your identity. It's who you are, you know? And so I've definitely felt like I've faced discrimination. Can I say that it's specifically because I'm Black? Not every time, but I think that it's something that impacts me as an individual, bringing to the table everything that makes me who I am. So for sure, definitely discrimination.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And for the longest time, I don't have my degree on there because
in my office, I don't anymore either.
Yeah, I don't feel like I owe anybody an explanation about why I am where I am. So you came to my door, it says Dr. Jerome-Majewska, that's who you came to meet. This is me. Deal with it.
Nice. Yeah. So another question, kind of diving more into y'all's research. Someone said, okay, it's a question from a friend who couldn't come. So they're going to still get their question answered, which is fun. What are your thoughts on the use of polygenic risk scores for personalized medicine, even though that data comes from studies on European cohorts?
So I think this is more your field of expertise.
You know, I don't use polygenic risk scores when giving my patients assessments because of the fact that it is really focused on one group and not comprehensive of all of the people who are going to be coming into my office. And I was trying to follow a trend on Twitter where people were bringing this up because it's not just polygenic risk scores that aren't really tailored to the needs of people of color, but cancer gene testing and variants of uncertain significance and so many other things that impact the way that we interpret the DNA of the people who are coming in and looking for information is really impacted by the fact that these studies are not for us. They're not done for us. They aren't addressing our needs. And so I don't use them for that reason. I think personalized medicine right now is not for everyone. And if it's not doing what it needs to do for everyone, then it has a really long way to go before I think that it's appropriate in a clinical setting. That's my opinion.
I don't do any clinical work, so I would not know. I know that on the research side, there's a real push now to try and have genetic information from African population.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, our population is the most diverse. Like, you know, if you look at our genome, there are a lot more changes. And so they don't know what to do with that. So until I guess you said it best. I'm going to leave it at that.
And for you, Loydie, maybe this is more about your work. Someone was wanting clarification on spliceosomopathy and like what kind of, do these diseases that maybe you mentioned earlier, they don't specifically say, impact any particular ancestral identities?
No, they don't. So spliceosomopathies are specifically mutations that affect the mechanism that's important for translating the information you have in your DNA into mRNA into a protein. Mm-hmm. And so essentially the proteins or the I guess, what would you call it? The molecular way that happens is that there's a group of proteins that comes together, and it's called a spliceosome. And so when this spliceosome functions properly, your mRNA can be translated into many different types of versions based on what's included or excluded. So it's like scissors, so cut different pieces and put them together. So when you have a change in those scissors, what happens is that things that should normally be put together are kind of put together wrong. So the pasting goes wrong. So when that happens, the downstream thing that goes wrong is that the cells can't talk to each other properly. So if cells can't talk to each other properly, then things that should form don't form properly. And so we call mutations or changes in the proteins that are important for this machine, the spliceosome, to form spliceomopathies. I hope that was clear.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I studied some genetics in undergrad, so okay. I might be a little biased, but yeah, I think that kind of where it depends on how it's cut is kind of the outcome that we're getting.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really interesting because there's a lot of variation that can happen due to that.
Well, we need the variation, right? Because so if you look at the genome of a mouse, which is what we study in a human, it's 20,000 genes. But the way that those 20,000 genes translate into protein varies on how things are assembled. And so there's a lot of splicing, like about 90% of our genes are spliced, which means that you get exon A and C together in some cells and exon A and B in others. And so that brings the diversity that we see in the protein products that we have in each cell. So it's really an important machine.
Yeah. And this a little bit is tying to, I guess, kind of genetic editing and splicing variation for Aarin. Someone asked if, like, what do you kind of imagine gene editing will affect genetic counseling in the future? And I feel like this is, people usually think of like genetic counseling as like what is this silly movie called like Gattaca, where you like edit all the genes and like, yeah, I think I know that's not what they're asking, but it's a little bit, that's like the weird dystopian thing that people have made up, but how is that going to play out in real life maybe?
I think that in general, when people think about genetic counseling and where our current technology is, there are already people who assume that going into a genetic counselor, you'll have a discussion about how you can create the perfect designer baby, right? I think that in general, though, I'm very hopeful and optimistic about that technology, about gene editing and CRISPR, but when I think about its uses right now and how that can change genetic counseling and the profession in general. If we're able to really identify and target ways to address genetic disease, then it's definitely going to impact the way that we discuss that with families and people who are at risk. It's kind of like opening up Pandora's box a little bit. But I do think that there is true utility, but we really need to be mindful of the way that we use those sorts of technologies.
We use CRISPR in the lab. It's an amazing technology. It has changed the way that we can make our genetic mutations, right? So you could imagine a future where this technology can be applied to human more so than any other technology we've ever had. But boy, do we need to be careful.
Yeah, well, I think we'll leave that at that. Yeah, maybe we need some time to figure out. CRISPR for lab experiments, though, is really, really cool. And then, Aarin, a little bit you were talking about working with patients and kind of like when they come into the office, you're not helping them create a designer baby. This person's asking, like, in your experience, has your identity as a Black woman been an asset for building relationships with patients of color and or maybe delivering bad news to those patients?
I would say absolutely. I think that when going into graduate school, I was most excited about the relationship building with patients, but most concerned about being the bearer of bad news, right? And I think that took a lot of just training from really great people who could give me the tools necessary to have those important discussions. But genetic counselors have the privilege and the responsibility of really sitting with and being present with people during times where they are learning potentially life-changing information. And in these moments, it's important to have something to connect to. And so I definitely think that the rapport that I build with a woman of color impacts the amount of information that they disclose to me. When you're trying to cultivate some sort of rapport and have a dynamic with people, you want to know where they are so that you can meet them there, right? And I think that it's important for me to be able to have a discussion and really be able to be present with someone wherever they are in that journey, whether it's because they just received a cancer diagnosis. And in addition to navigating that, I'm telling them they carry a hereditary gene mutation that might increase the risk for other cancers, not just for them, but for their family members. Or if I'm talking to a woman who's in the middle of a very much wanted, much prayed for pregnancy, and I'm the one telling her that there's a poor prognosis for it. You know, I think that, at least for me, when I'm in the middle of trying to navigate something tough, I'm looking for something to reach out to and connect to. And I really feel like being a woman of color and being able to kind of stand in that gap in the middle of a tornado of other things that are going on has helped my patients. And in the moments where I've been uncertain about my own healthcare or other things, I'm always looking for some connection. And so I really think it just boils down to identity. How do I identify? I am a Black woman first. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a Christian. And so all of those things kind of help to shape the way that I make my decisions. And I'm looking to see, is this okay? Who can I connect to? Who can I talk to that might be able to understand where I'm coming from and be able to help me walk this path? And I think genetic counselors really have the unique opportunity to be there for patients in really, really difficult times. And I'm not trying to make the assumption or the presumption that my white genetic counseling colleagues wouldn't be able to do that. But I know that there's power in learning from and hearing from people who look like you, who are invested in you, because I think that at the end of the day, no one rides for Black people like Black people do, you know? And so I think that's important. And I appreciate every single patient interaction that I have with a woman who looks like me and is looking to me to help her navigate this really difficult time.
Yeah, that's really well said. Loydie, I think you're muted though. I don't know.
Oh, I was just going, wow, you go. You just sound amazing. Like, I hope if I ever
You
need a
sound
counselor,
amazing.
I walk into a room like yours.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like the fact we need more medical professionals that are like able to connect with their patients in that way and make you feel safe. And yeah, because that's how you can make better, you can help better if you know more of what's going on.
Yeah.
We'll go, so this one's a question for both of y'all. We'll like steer a little back into kind of the beginnings of your interests. Like, how did you fall in love with genetics? And I guess someone asked, who are your mentors? And so maybe it would be cool to say, like, how did you fall in love with genetics? And maybe like who helped inspire you and who's still maybe around today that you are like mentor-mentee relationship?
I learned about the field of genetic counseling when I was in college. I was taking a cultural anthropology class and a cross-cultural psychology class in the same quarter. And in each of those classes, something came up that kind of tied into genetics. My cultural anthropology teacher encouraged us for extra credit to go to a speaking session on the Human Genome Project. And it was just for extra credit, but I found myself so interested in what they were talking about. And then my cross-cultural psychology teacher had a guest speaker come from AfricanAncestry.com. And at the time, they were discussing with us the nuances between the way that they were providing information to people of African descent and then the other direct-to-consumer tests like Ancestry.com. So instead of learning that you were 70% African, they were trying to really identify which countries of origin and give you much more information. And I was like, that's so cool. I wonder if I could do an internship or something with them. So that's really what started me Googling. And then once I started doing the research and finding out what genetic counselors do, I was like, this is everything that I enjoy, because unlike Dr. Majewska, I do not like laboratory work. It isn't for me at all. I hated organic chemistry and I do not like lab work. Oh my God. I'm sorry to break your heart. It is not for me. So because of that, I really liked just the combination of taking the skills that I had learned as a bio major, not really being too hot on the idea of being in the lab, and communicating with people in the genetic counseling field. And then I found out that there was a genetic counseling program at Howard University. I didn't know until I started Googling, but Barbara Harrison is an amazing genetic counselor who at the time was actually the director of the genetic counseling program, the training program at Howard. And when I started trying to shadow and learn from genetic counselors, I kind of had a hard time getting into the clinic with someone. But Barbara Harrison was not that person. She was like, you want to come on over? You can come over on Tuesday. And I got to just shadow her, watch her in her clinic, look at how she engaged with patients. And they just seemed so interested and invested in what I would have thought might have been high level scientific information, but the way she explained it was thorough and clear. And I was like this woman. And so my mentor, I would say, would have to be Barbara Harrison, because she let me see what Black genetic counselors look like and the impact that they make. But genetic counseling was really found by chance.
That is so cool.
I'm gonna quick interject because as you said, Barbara Harrison posted a question in the chat. So you gave her a shout out and she's here. She kind of going off of what you were just saying, I guess, she's interested in like, how do you think we can get more African-American students into genetics and genetic counseling? Because it sounds like you might have found it by chance, but then after that point, like you kind of ran with it. So how can we get more people involved?
Yeah, I think we just need to be more like Barbara Harrison, to be honest with you. I think that in order to get more people of color, especially young African Americans, involved in genetic counseling, they need to know that it exists.
Yeah.
So, being that face, going out and understanding that representation is important, volunteering at health fairs, just being ready to be the face of genetic counseling whenever it's needed, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because we all have the training and we have the knowledge and we are experts in this field, right? So just step out of your comfort zone, be the bridge in that gap of healthcare disparities, and let people know that this is out here. When I talk to patients and they come in, sometimes they'll say things like, my daughter might be interested in this, and I'll share information and take contact info, because it's important to be the face of something that people might not even know existed. And I would be devastated if I had never found out that genetic counseling was a thing. Like, what would I be doing? I don't know, but I'm grateful that I found it and that Barbara Harrison was there to open up that door and really just welcome me in, you know. And I didn't go to her training program, but she is the reason why I wanted to be a genetic counselor. So super grateful to her. We just all need to be like her.
Well, yeah, she says hi. So, and Loydie, we'll jump back to you for kind of like, how did you get into genetics, and who were your mentors? Maybe they're on here too.
Maybe, I don't know. So it was also an accident. So I wanted, and I am a developmental biologist. Like I said, what I wanted to know was how you go from a single cell to a complex organism. And so I was very lucky, very early in my life, I met while I was at Wesleyan. So Laura Grable took a first year undergraduate student who had just decided that she did not want to do pre-med into her lab. And I told her that I really like research and I want to know how this happens. And she said, well, here's what we're doing. Here's some papers. Take a look and see if there's any question that you might want to answer with. Yeah. And I was just, oh my God, this is heaven. This was for me what started everything. And so I designed a project, and when I went to her, she didn't say this was insane. She said, okay, let's design your experiments. And so that was my honors thesis project as an undergraduate. I worked in the lab for 4 years, and she helped me find money every summer to work in the lab to supplement my work study. So for me, you need people like that in your life. And then when I went to graduate school, again, I wanted to expand my life and do more things. So I applied for a program in cellular molecular biophysics, but I ended up in a genetics lab because I really liked Ginny Papiano, and I liked the way she did things. And she was using embryonic stem cells to make mutants in mice. And it's not so much the genetics that got me there, but it was the question she was asking. And so the first genetic project that I got to work on was making a mouse model for 22q11.2 deletion syndrome. And while doing that project, I met Donna McGinnis, and she's a genetic counselor at CHOP, who I still collaborate with to this day. And so that was where I realized the importance of genetic counselors. And when I started my own lab, I realized that I need the genetic to go with the development, because I want to understand what goes wrong. And in order to understand what goes wrong, you need to know, what things normally should happen like. And I wanted to have a direct impact on human health. Like, for me, that's really important. I really want to understand and help people who have babies who have these defects. And so that's kind of my mentors. They're still, all of them are still in my life. I still email, and sometimes, I would call Ginny and say, somebody said, I don't know how to do this. And she said, you tell them you're the expert in this. So that's how my life has been.
That's awesome. And I think something really cool that I'm at least getting from this is that while y'all are both like interested in genetics, there's so many different pathways that if you are interested in genetics, there's so many other ways you can use it.
Yes. Definitely. Yeah.
Yes. It's a huge field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, it's also, I'm imagining like biology as this giant thing. Genetics is underneath that, but it's still huge. And like, there's so many different things you can do with it, which I think is really inspiring, that like there's a way to pull all of your interests into whatever you're wanting to do with genetics, which is awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
And we have a quick, someone just did a little shout out. Their name is Michelle Takamoto. She said, hi, I'm the project coordinator for the Minority Genetics Professional Network. We are here as a resource for the BIPOC folks who are both current and prospective clinical genetic professionals. So I think we just wanted to say hi to y'all that they're here. So then from there, someone has another question when we were talking about CRISPR and kind of the bioethics of that. And I think maybe we would go to Loydie first, since you mentioned using CRISPR, and then Aarin, if you want to comment on how you feel. But they're basically asking, how do you feel about the bioethics of technology like CRISPR? And maybe if we want to expand on like where we're going to go as we continue to develop this technology?
So I think it's an amazing technology. I am really happy it exists. I think there are people who are coming up with ways to make sure we use it ethically. I think it's like the development of the nuclear bomb, essentially. Like when I think about what we can do with CRISPR, and we could do things that are not good just by accident. So I like the fact that there seems to be like American Society of Human Genetics is taking a real approach to try and make real guidelines. The technology itself is not the problem. It's the ease at which you can now change things that is the problem. And so I think we as human, we tend to think we understand things. Like I say, the genes I study are genes that are in every cell. So if you change things, what happens to the cells downstream? We don't know. We don't know. There's so much we don't know. We think we know. We don't know enough to use this in a way that's responsible if we start going into the germline. That's not to say we can't take stem cells and change things and put some of those cells back after we do all of the QC, quality control. But I think it's important that we are really purposeful in how we approach this technology. That's my feeling about CRISPR.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, but like cautiously optimistic. I agree completely with Dr. Majewska. It's an amazing technology, but what's wrong with being different? You know, I think that we really have to be mindful of how people use such a technology. The fact that we can do these things is amazing, but does that mean that we should?
Yeah, no, those are both really good points. And I think that's at least the thing that I think is really cool about genetics is that, that variation, how are you going to control, like, whether if you're selecting on this little piece in one gene, but it's going to affect all these other cells and different cell types. And yeah, so I feel like we have a long way to go, and maybe using them for specific lab experiments, I think is really valuable, but why we're not trying to make designer babies. We have another question about, that's for both of y'all. So they said that you are both passionate about genetics. In what ways does your work and passion overlap with your personal lives, such as maybe volunteer work and community engagement? And if you would be open to talking about those types of things you do outside of your work.
I am obsessed with the Sickle Cell Disease Foundation of California. Shameless plug. So I think that in addition to being passionate about the patients that I'm seeing in clinic that are referred to us in genetics, and as a genetic counselor, I'm a member of a team, right? I work with a clinical geneticist. We get referrals for patients to see us from a number of different specialties, but we work with lab counselors, medical clinical geneticists, and genetic counselors here at work, at least in my setting, but genetic counselors do all kinds of amazing things. For me though, my volunteer work is mostly focused on underserved populations. So there's an event here in California called the Taste of Soul. It's in Los Angeles, where community groups kind of organize. People sell goods, and lots of like medical centers will come out and try to make people aware of the kinds of resources that they offer. And every year I go with my little genetics pamphlets, like, could cancer run in your family? And they're things that the organization has already put together, but I'm putting them in the hands of people up and down Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles. And it's mostly serving Black and brown people, this event. And so I think that that's one way, is to stand there and make sure that people who look like you know that you are someone who can service them. But the Sickle Cell Disease Foundation in California is a really, really amazing organization that offers free services to families, whether it's hemoglobin trait counseling and summer camps for children who have sickle cell disease. So there's a camp for kids aged 7 to 14, and there's a camp for young people 15 to 18. The camp is called Camp Crescent Moon. Look how inventive they were. Crescent moon, if you guys know, is the shape of those sickled cells. And there are a number of people who work tirelessly to put this camp together to give these kids a week-long camp experience that they might not otherwise get to have. So there are medical specialists, doctors, hematologists who specialize in sickle cell, who are there to make sure that these kids are safe all week long, and then just people who love the camp, who are there all day, every day for a week, trying to make sure that we're creating these really memorable experiences for kids. So I think that that is, I love Camp Crescent Moon, and it's the joy of my outside life apart from my family and Jesus, but I'm all about Camp Crescent Moon. So find something that you're passionate about and volunteer your time. That's what I do with mine.
Awesome. I really love the name. That's really cute.
Isn't it?
That is really cool. So for me, it's different because part of what I'm hired to do is service as well. And so as far as service, I sit on a lot of committees. So I sit on committees for the American Association of Anatomists, the Society of Developmental Biology, and at McGill as well. And so those service in the past had focused on making the university run better, et cetera, et cetera. And now, as I said, what I have focused my energy on for the past 5 years, I would say, is like making programs to have more folks of color be part of our field. And so a lot of the things that I do are on diversity committees or so in both cases, that's what I have shuttled my energy towards. And then the other thing that I work with is the 22q11.2 Deletion Syndrome Foundation. So recently I joined their board, because for me, that's a genetic disease that's interesting scientifically, but is also interesting as far as the patients, because it's such a variety of expressivity. So just because a patient is diagnosed with 22q11.2, you can't necessarily predict what the outcome is going to be. And so for me, as a scientist, it's a really interesting question. How do you get at that? How do you make the diagnosis better? And so we use the genetic models to try and identify other genes or other things that interact with this deletion to give the presentations that you see in the different populations. So that's how I do my service. I think outside of lab and all of those things, the thing I think spend the most time doing is running or lifting weight. So that's my other passion.
That's why we see those yummy shoulders of yours.
Thank you. A lot of push-ups.
That's true. I guess things are still closed in California, at least, so we can't go to the gym unless you have your own weights at home. But.
Yes, I have weights.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to. That's gonna be the end of the crowd questions. It was awesome. And I have the last couple of short questions from Skype Scientists that we always end our little live streams with. So the first question, is there anything that you wish that you were asked about? And we can start with Aarin. Put you on the spot first.
Ooh, I think that I wish that someone asked me what I do for self-care, because self-care is really important. I think that I spend a lot of time with my baby girl. She's almost 18 months old. We watch a lot of Disney, and we play on ABC Mouse, and she watches a lot of Baby First TV, but she is my life's joy, and I was waiting to say how much I love my baby, so I wish someone had asked me about that.
I think that's a really important question that I also now, I always tell, like, so I gave a small TED talk, and too much of that time was spent actually talking about self-care, because you need an outlet. You need to have something outside of what you do as work. So I have 2 children, so you can have a family and do a PhD. I had my oldest son when I was finishing my PhD, and I had my baby boy, who's now 17, as a postdoc. So you can have a family. You need to find supportive partners. So my husband is amazing and has helped me to make this possible, to have a career and run. It's really good. It clears your head. So find a passion. And I bake. I like to bake.
Oh, I like to eat.
I like, well, that's why I run. So yeah, so I think I think that's an important question to always ask, is what do you do to deal with the stress? Yeah. Congratulations on the baby.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And shout out to my mom and my husband, because I'm pretty sure that they're watching. Hello.
The second question is there something that you wish everyone knew about your work? Like a little, like if you could like transmit it to everyone in the world somehow, what would you say about your work?
It's cool.
Yeah.
I would say that my work is really centered on helping to figure out how development and genetic intersect. And so I think it's really cool what we do, and we have a lot of fun. It's hard, but it's really fun. It's really, really fun, so look into it.
I would say that I want people to know that genetic counselors are here, and it is a growing field that has so much to offer, and please consider it if you're interested in science. And it's a great way to help people. You don't always have to be a medical doctor to make a difference.
That's true. And the last question, we're getting lots of positive comments in the little Q&A that y'all are doing an amazing job, by the way. The last thing we're gonna end with, is there something that you wish everyone knew about anything? Like any fun fact or thing that you would like to share to kind of wrap up our live stream?
I'm going to second what the amazing, brilliant Dr. Janina just said at the last session, that race is a social construct. And I would really like for everybody to remember that.
I think that's an excellent place to end. I think, yeah. And that really your color does not define your genetics.
Mm-hmm.
One very small part of who we are. So.
We are far more alike than we are different. Right?
Yeah. So yeah. I like that one.
Yeah, thank y'all so much for coming on today and talking with us. We've had like a lot of people asking really cool questions. So thank you to everyone that attended. And thanks again, Aarin, for doing all of our translating. I really appreciate you being here. And yeah, great. It was great to meet y'all. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Thanks for giving us this platform, and Go Black in Genetics Week. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for this fabulous session. And it's really great meeting you, Aarin. I might be emailing you. So.
Thank you.
That's awesome. And yeah, tomorrow we have another event. So hopefully we see more of our attendees there, or maybe y'all will be there too.
Great. Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Aarin. Bye.
Bye.